Okay. All right, cool. Now we're live. Woohoo! Like we're live.
Popping in.
Okay.
Okay.
You're fine. Exciting. I love being live. Y'all, I love being live with one of my amazing friends, Maura. We go live a lot together, so that's good. I really like her to have like a running spot on the podcast. For those of you guys that do not know, we collaborated and also both use bioresonance devices in our practices. We use a lot of mind body medicine. She's like an expert in German new medicine. I developed a method called the Soul Sync method of brain training based on all my experience in sales. And we teach other providers how to implement some of that into their practices and have a community that you can come to if you are a provider and collaborate. So you can come and bring your scenarios with clients. I just helped one of my newer clients in that community triage through a client of hers that she wants some input on, and how we would use a bioresonance device, integrate with her lab work and her PATA protocol, and offer support for this client that she is still trying to work on after 8 months. So super cool. All that work that we're doing, super awesome. If you're a provider, you're going to want to follow both of us because that's just something that we're super passionate about. And if you have any interest in integrating mind body medicine in your practice, like if you're a functional medicine provider, sometimes even if you're a chiropractor, if you want to know what in the world is going on behind the physical ailment, then this is the place to be. So I'll open it up like that. Today, we're going to talk about all things chronic illness and symptoms that show up post-divorce. So if anyone has followed me for a super long time or even a little bit of time, you know that I talk about I talk about both positive or negative acute stressors. So I call acute stressor. Like if you have a divorce, it's arguably a stressor on the entire body, nervous system. You're basically starting and recreating a whole life. Similar to if you have a new baby, if you have a child leave the home, these are things that people tend to weigh up as good or bad. But I talk about them in my practice in terms of in the verbiage of acute stressor, because a stressor can be positive or negative, and usually it's both. So for example, when people say, oh, hey, you got divorced and want to, talk all about the bad parts of it or the parts that were really hard. I've been divorced, Maura's been divorced. Then something that I'm usually always really correcting them on is how much good came from that situation. Like how much catalyst for change came from that situation. Does it mean there's not hard? Have we not walked through chronic illness and symptoms that have manifested as a result of that divorce, that trauma, even like ongoing, continual parenting and co-parenting and all that? 100% we have, but still wouldn't get married to my ex. Okay. So we'll just put it that
way. Yeah. And actually, the 3-letter agencies will have even said like people who are divorced higher incidence of chronic illness, substance abuse, and death. So you literally have a higher risk, statistic-wise, of cancer, heart disease, metabolic issues, things like that. What they don't get into is like why does each person with a divorce have a different chronic illness, has a different, like a very similar situation in the reasons we got divorced or the details around that, but you end up with totally different chronic symptoms. I would even extend some of your chronic symptoms, even if they start showing up during relationship stress. What we do is we start to take those symptoms and use them as like the great big, hey, start here with your healing. That's like what you're basically begging for, in my opinion.
Yeah. Cool. That's awesome. I mean, so yeah, tell me, okay, I know you have your practice up and running. You're super excited, about it day to day. You developed a really amazing program called the Vibrant Way for shifting women out of nervous system dysfunction. What really got you on the niche of divorce. Like, I really genuinely want to know what shifted. I mean, I don't even know that I have talked to you in private about all this. So I'm like, what was the moment where you're like, okay, I'm doing divorce? Was it a lingering chronic health issue for yourself? Was it just all your friends experiencing it? Like, I literally am curious.
Well, it wasn't something I talked about so directly, but the way that I created the methodology for the Vibrant Way included my divorce. Like the first time I had adrenal fatigue was the beginning of the relationship stress. The second time I had adrenal fatigue was in the first like couple years after separation and divorce. And and there's a whole story about how I used two totally different, but I think I just finally got to a point where I was just like, well, divorce impacts every single part of your life. Like there's nothing in your life that's not really touched by divorce. And I was keeping mine very private as I was healing. And a couple weeks ago, I was kind of having this idea. It was like kept coming up in my mind. I was just kind of like sitting on it, thinking on it, praying on it, meditating on it. And I went out to like a dance thing, ran into an old neighbor who knew me when I was married. And she knew me like during the good parts of my marriage, because I had a really long, really good part of my marriage. I actually have probably one of the best possible scenarios for divorce. My ex is undeniably not a narcissist. Like there's no way anybody would ever say that about him, including myself, his ex-wife. But so she knew me during the good parts. And as she and I were talking, she like stopped me and she's like, are you in love? Like she knows I'm divorced, that we're not together anymore because she still lives in the old neighborhood where he lives, where I used to live. And she's like, are you in love? And I'm like, I'm not even dating anybody. I don't have any of that. But just like my energy is different. And the first thing that came up after the no, why do you ask, was no, just with myself. And I was like, oh my gosh, I was like really struck by how true that statement was. Like it wasn't something I was like working so hard to love myself. I mean, we all go through that phase, when you're like gonna show somebody you love yourself because you're telling them like, and I'm like, oh, I don't, it's not that anymore. It's like so embodied now that she saw it and that I just feel it in a totally different way. And this is happening not because I've moved on to a new relationship or anything like that. It's just, I have been able to shift things so that things that used to make me cry that were just like so deep don't hit me like in that solar plexus, deep needs like internal stitches emotionally kind of wounding place. And I was like, oh gosh, what did I do to do that? And like, can I help women do that as well?
Yeah. Well, that's a beautiful thing. I mean, it's so funny because I'm very protective of a lot of the details of my divorce story, not because I give two craps about my ex, but because mine is a lot more tumultuous, where someone is very manipulative towards my kids, and I'm more honest and open about it now because that fear has been de-escalated. But for the longest time, I was like in that just strategy, constant, what do we say mode. Well, I realized in like being in that, you're still participating. You're still very much participating in your relationship.
Yeah.
So it was like having two marriages, right? So I got remarried 2 years after my divorce, which you're not remarried. So like, it's so cool it's so cool. And so also hard, the dynamics that you have to navigate. Like, obviously, like, I mean, I feel for my husband because he's basically like still also in a relationship with my ex who he never gave a shit about in the first place. You know what I mean? Didn't even know, you know what I mean? So it's like, comes with the territory. And he's so gracious in the times where like I have to like vent something out or we're processing something like really hard. We have a blended family. So, it's 2 kids who come and go 50% of the time and 4 of ours together. So it's just this big, constant moving chaos machine.
And young children too, really young children. So obviously the newborn and toddlers.
Oh my gosh. I mean, every time you go through divorce, like people ask me, I am very like, I'm in such a healed place now that I can like objectively look at so many different factors. Like it's like
Mm-hmm.
people would ask me for the longest time, they would be like, I have no shame even in my current marriage saying something like, and I don't want to be with my ex. There's not one part of me that has a visceral connection like at all. We've done all that work and I mean, we didn't want to be together when we were married. So it's like it was like two very dysfunctional patterns going on. But I'm like the interesting thing is had somebody encouraged me to do any semblance of the work that I do now, like the emotional work, the cognitive processing, the mind body medicine work, like I don't know. No one said to me, "Hey, like shit's going to get way hard when you get divorced." Like people were like, "Get divorced. It's going to be amazing. Like you're going to be free." And I was
Yeah.
like, "Free? Like we ain't free to do anything. We're not free to change to switch schools. We're not free to move. Like we're not free like in our lives. We
Yeah.
are free because we set ourselves free." So I don't want to bring like that victimhood into this podcast, but I mean, we'll get deep into that, but it's really interesting because that, you know, I even say to my husband, I'm like now that I'm remarried, I'm like, we're staying through a lot. Like we're going to commit to figuring it out. Now, obviously two people have to want to do that work, which was not my situation. Like I
Right.
started wanting to do that work. The other person did not want to do that work. And with that brought so much like pain and stress and symptoms and misalignment and jobs and migraines. And so when you started this new offer, I was like, oh my gosh, I am just so interested and excited because I do see so much of this in my practice. It is, you know, it is resonate with me. It's like on my background. I do triage it on the back end. I've
Yeah.
never made an offer around it because I don't have the amicable situation to like put it out there and really it's not my thing. But I'm like, it is so cool how like you have come to that place and now can gift that to other people. I want to know, like, is there a certain type of chronic that you see with, I mean, look, even if they're not your clients yet, that you just see
Mhm.
with women in your sphere that you know who are divorced? Like, is there a certain chronic that you're like, oh, that always comes up?
Well, it's not something that always comes up. I will say there's the chronic archetype of the divorced woman. I'm looking for my notes right now to kind of
That's
give
fine.
an idea of. We've got the divorced woman archetype, right? Like, and I really didn't think
I
about
can't
this
wait
until
to hear
a
this.
married, yeah, a married friend was like, you know what? I really like hanging out with you more than any other divorced woman that I know because you're respectful to men. Like, I really am respectful to men. I know that there's shitty
Yeah.
men out there. There's shitty women out there. There's shitty people in every group, you know,
Oh,
like,
oh yeah.
um, and like, she's like, you're respectful of marriage. I don't feel like you're trying to like needle in or like exacerbate any little argument. If I tell you I had an argument with my husband, you don't like hop on that wagon and try to get me into the divorce camp. And I'm like, no, I really think like I believe in marriage. If a marriage can be saved, I think it should be saved, but I don't think that every marriage can be saved. Like
Right.
that, like you exactly like what you said, like if two people are willing to do the work, that's a marriage that can be saved. And when you don't have one, then that's there's nothing you can do with that. It's like it takes two people to make a marriage work. It only takes one to turn it or to divorce it, to ruin it, in my
Totally.
opinion. But I use German medicine, as you mentioned earlier. It's a mind body method that was created in the 70s and 80s by a German doctor. And he did like amazing work providing that there's an interplay between psyche, the brain, and the organ. And not only did he find that, and he used brain scans to correlate what he was saying, but he also did extensive interviews. And we were talking like 10,000 people that he worked with. Like, if y'all were relying on me to do this kind of work and this kind of discovery, we'd just be out of luck. I can't imagine like what this man did to figure all of this out. But he was able to take your symptom and say, okay, this kind of conflict. So when I was talking to women and collecting, I was having what? Like, I mean, I had no less than like, what is there, like 6 issues that came up like multiple times. So it was never just like one specific chronic thing, but like Skin issues can be like an abandonment, or rather an attack conflict, feeling soiled conflict, a separation conflict. So you can see easily how all of those can come up in relationship stress. Like the fear of being abandoned is like a very common fear for people. Feeling soiled, especially like, was there infidelity somewhere? Like that can be like a really triggering thing for that. Or separation, like being separated from them, wanting to be separated from them, being separated from your kids. So it can be around wanting to be separated or not wanting to be separated, and you are. Hormonal can be profound loss, sexual conflicts, pain, not feeling good enough. Like, and where your pain is will kind of tell us the exact situation that we can focus on and start to resolve. So when I got the pieces together of like, okay, this is the memory, here's how we work with it, here's how we neutralize it, here's what we can expect during the healing, that's kind of like, I think, brought all of this together, that it took this from an idea to like, oh no, this is actually something that we can move a lot and teach somebody how to move things in 6 weeks. People have like weight gain. That can, like, one of the things that women talk about is like losing your entire social circle. Like I think you shared that you moved to the area where your husband was. All your friends were connected to him, and those all just go. I got separated in 2020 when everybody was like locked down. And so my friends who had been kind of like your friends on the wagon, like, yeah, get divorced. You're not going to carry a single box like to your new place. I carried every single one of those boxes because those friends who had said that were hiding from an oogie boogie. And like,
they're like, those MFers were heavy too.
We're not still friends anymore. There's a reason.
So, isn't it funny how your identity like shifts? Yes, I actually shared that with you at brunch the other day. That actually hit my spirit like so hard. I rarely ever think about it now, but it's like so funny when you were saying your offer. We were talking because we do get the joy of being in person, which is so nice. When I'm up in the city for dance comps, it's so funny. Like I remember. I mean, I'm a natural born strategist. I do think people go into divorces without a calculated plan. Like I see it all the time, and they get into crazy ass chaos. I did not do my divorce like that. So there were things that I couldn't strategize away or strategize my brain around because you just don't know till you walk something new. And that was the one thing that I didn't plan for. So what was really interesting is like, logistically, I was good. Like, I was like, I've got a job. I know how to move. I can get a duplex. Like, I was financially independent. I mean, there were blessings that were different. Like, I mean, I wasn't financially making as much money as my ex, but I mean, I could afford to reestablish myself, like, outside the home. I mean, now, hey, logistic wise, it's like, this is not turning into a divorce advice podcast, although I would love a business around this. But it's like there are logistic things to consider. Like if you move, you're going to lose things. You're going to lose the school district. You could lose things. Like, so there's logistics that really do suck when you're in a hostile divorce. But it was really interesting. Like the one thing that I didn't plan for was my entire circle of friends that were my support. They weren't necessarily support with our kids. I'm like, my ex-husband wasn't even support with our kids. Like he like went and made money and whatever, but we were all kind of in that like young, just came out of college crowd. We were the only ones with kids. Everybody like was like team him or like team I'm just out, like for both of you, like, which he experienced that too. He may never admit that to me, but I know for a fact he did because like I remember talking after our divorce and stuff like that, just here and there. And even though it was like super hostile because we were friends before. And it's like, it's so interesting. Like, I mean, my very best girlfriends gone overnight. Like my very best guy friends that were there the whole time for me, like, really putting stuff in my face. Like, what kind of guy wouldn't come to Valentine's Day with you? Like, why do you do all the holidays by yourself? Like these things that were truly like his friends were pointing out, his friends didn't become my friends. Like they were like, we're thick as thieves, babe. Like we've been in the fraternity together. Like they were like, yeah, like we feel that. That's true. But this is too chaotic. We all just still want to party. Like there was so many different crowds of that. And like, I was like, then single mothering like myself.
Yeah.
And I developed a very severe hospitalized reaction of an HPV virus. Like it
Mm.
was like a pelvic inflammatory expression that hospitalized me for 3 days on
Mhm.
Christmas. So what was
Mhm.
really interesting is all that kind of hit. And at the time I was like at the time I was like, this is punishment for how this shook down. This is punishment for adultery. This is punishment for all of it. Like I'm
Yeah.
very open. If somebody asks me about our divorce and the messiness and everything, I'm really open about it. But like now it's like I realized it wasn't punishment. It was this like set free healing conflict, right? It was like
Yeah.
it
Yes.
was exactly what I needed to not be in the house with my mom, his mom, and our drunk Santa Claus we hired for Christmas. Like it was just a fucking nightmare, like to be honest. Like it was
Yeah, you
like,
were able to be separated and like living that. And so the
yeah,
symptoms express when you're in the healing mode, like this conflict that puts you into high alert and puts your body on like this super sympathetic place. And there can be different ranges of that where it's like
yes,
you're subconsciously looking for like all the signs and triggers. Now you can't go back to that Christmas event and your body's like, okay, we have to change what we were doing to keep ourselves safe during the conflict time. And so now it's the healing time. And
totally.
HPV is just totally classic, like separation, conflict, healing time. And it makes sense like why it comes up in cases where there's infidelity, is that there's this conflict between like, I had this affair and not that I had an affair, but like I had this and I'm feeling guilty about it, but then we resolved it and now I'm feeling better about it, or I'm feeling gross about this, or a partner did this outside of our marriage and came to me and now I feel soiled and nasty, and then
Yep.
you resolve it and then you have the expression of the symptoms. Uh,
Isn't
so
that
this kind
so
of gets out of our
fascinating?
germ theory. It's awesome.
I'm like literally fascinated about it. Like now I'm like, oh, like I didn't know about German new medicine, and really honestly until me and you started talking about it, wasn't something that I ever dove deep into. Now I find myself looking at it, referencing it all the time. So I want to
Mhm.
like hear more about that because I know that's really what you've centered your stuff around. It's like it's so funny. The one thing that I've always known is I am very, I'm into the Christian space of like, and look, German New Medicine, I believe is fully Christian. So I'll just clarify that before we
Yeah.
move on. But I, at the time, was into the space of like, if you can back it up in the Bible and it's Jesus's idea, like, okay, cool, right? Like, I'm like a high intuitive. So it's so funny because I was like, all I knew was I was like, it's so funny shifting from that punishment gospel to then shifting into like, oh, there's duality here. So I did make that shift like 3 or 4 years later, because what's so funny is I would consider that a chronic because it kept
Mhm.
flaring.
Yeah.
Like it never went away. It flared when I had every time I had new babies with my husband, my current husband now. It flared any acute stressor where me and him would fight and I would perceive that it was going to end like,
Mhm.
like abandonment or even if we would fight and I was like I can't resolve it right away, it would flare. Like and I
Mhm.
was always like you look up shingles and you look up HPV in the book that I practice from, and it'll say it's like unworthiness, like all that stuff. But from a German new medicine standpoint, it's pretty cool. It's a pretty radical school of thought. Like I still get confused on like, am I healing? What part of the crisis am I in? Like all those details. But I'm like, the coolest part is that now that I look back, I'm like, so many parts of that was the healing. Like
Yeah.
so much of that even brought attention to me facing like, okay, like stuff with like generational sin and adultery in my family. Like,
Mhm.
why was that the only way you perceived you could escape that marriage? Like, why
Mhm.
was that the only way? I mean, flip side of that, why was that your go-to to blow it up? Why didn't it get more? And look,
Mhm.
that was not the root of all things not being amicable. Things were not amicable before that. But I'm saying
Mhm.
it definitely added like something that it really showed me in the conflict was like, why do you love and thrive in chaos? Like, why couldn't
Mhm.
you just go like hey, like we already suck. We're done. Like, like,
Yeah.
I mean, I had that conversation, but never pulled the trigger on forward motion. You know what I mean? And then it was like
Right.
funny to watch myself then like burn it all down with a one night stand and say that to my husband. I'm like, okay, well, that was like not my current husband, but I'm like, that was my like my toolbox. Like, I'm like, wow, what,
Yeah.
whose
Well,
toolbox is that? Somebody real effed up.
one of the things that I say to people that sometimes they don't really like hearing, and because it can be at first like a hard pill to swallow, but then when you see like the turnaround about it and the power in it, then it's like the best thing to hear is that the partners that we pull in have our healing codes. So like no matter what happens, there's a reason why not every woman gets bogged down with a narcissist. Like some of us just don't have that. We already have that filter where like, that was weird, because narcissists show themselves like pretty easily. And you're like, that was weird. I'm going to go over here. And if that was your space that needed to be healed, then you're going to stay kind of in that dynamic until you're ready to like move it along. And so you can shift your perspective. And this is not to like say that things that you go through aren't hurtful, aren't like abusive, it's not to excuse anything that somebody else is doing, but there is power in being able to, like, I love what you do with your divorce when things get super, super chaotic. Like you had something this summer and you just let it kind of ride out because you're like, I know he's going to kind of go into his own chaos. Here's where I'm going to put my energy into like being there for my kids and showing up for them and like providing this consistent platform to like come back and like really parent from a place of love and just let him do. That's like a healed way of working. But when you're like kind of in the like stress is love, control is love, like you need to heal that. And so that is why you can sometimes draw in a partner. I mean, it happens with married couples too, where we see like a super frugal person and marry a super spendthrift. And it's like, you guys are maybe a little bit too far on the outskirts and like can learn from each other and come to the middle because you each have each other's healing codes.
Oh my gosh, that's so true. Like, so, I mean, I don't know. I haven't gone really deep yet on the pod about my background, but I grew up with a mother that truly had narcissistic personality disorder. Truly. Like, I'm saying, I don't throw that diagnosis out lightly. Like, she was like bipolar, multiple schizophrenia, like multiple personalities, just because, and not multiple personalities like you guys. She's like in a psych ward freaking out. Like, I'm talking literal different realities that you can't keep straight because she had different entities and personalities based on trauma. Like complex trauma is a B and complex trauma to grow up in is really interesting. And I tell people, I'm like, they'll be like, I don't know how you move forward. I mean, I move forward because I finally got this idea that God is working everything for our good for real, that there's like duality there, like that. Dealing with that gave me my edge. It made me damn good at sales. It gave me this ability to ask questions. It refined all this discernment that I obviously was downloaded by God as a child. You know what I mean? Like when they say, oh, people have the gift of discernment, it's like, I can just see truth, like see it like real quick. Like it doesn't take me, a minute not to see it. And it's like, it is really interesting. It's interesting moving into that place though, where you see people as they are and you know that you can't change them. So something that I unpacked in my own life once I started having kids, once I realized I was in a marriage with a similar person was that, I mean, and I want to be clear, and this is just as much for me as it is for anybody else. I don't hate my ex. I have no ill feelings. That's not me covering my bases in case he hears this YouTube. This is me saying like, I'm not saying he's my mom. I don't do those kind of comparisons. He's his own person. Like we are so healed in that space, not we together, but we as individuals. Like I'm like, I have found more fruit in sending him that neutral or that loving vibration, not fawning, not participating, but that loving vibration as far as like, what you do genuinely does not have to affect me unless I need it to. Like that general not being a victim than we ever found. And that was just born of like just doing the work with my mom and all this stuff. And then, but some of those ideas, and this is what I want to talk to you about and why you formed your offer, some of those ideas get really sticky, really sticky. So The other thing, the thing that it was so interesting, because I worked with a naturopath for a long time to try to restore my heartbeat, which a lot of people know that story. And I never could just figure out, like, okay, why? Because I believe in the body, I believe how it heals, I believe all that. There's nothing viral, like, there's no problem. Like, why do I not just believe that, like, my heart is gonna be fine? Why?
Mhm.
Like, I'm like, why did I get sucked into like a pacemaker? And we trace it all down to the some of the accusations about my son, ironically. Like, so when we were getting divorced, he was 2, so he was still very much under my energy, very much, susceptible. And for a couple months there, it was pretty messy. Like, 2 people wanted to party and leave kids at home and that kind of thing. And I just couldn't let that go. Like, I just couldn't let it go. Like, and then so
Mhm.
I couldn't face it. I couldn't let that go. I couldn't let all the decisions go with him and just all the accusations. And what was really interesting was that was a big piece of my heart rate restoring. So whatever belief system had set up in the heart is so interesting. I'm like, you would probably find that really fascinating because you probably see it and you will see stuff in clinical application like that. But you'll never hear, guys, in a doctor that you might hear, oh, you're stressed, or oh, your
Mhm.
emotions have something to do. But unless you work with a trained provider that can literally go like, okay, let me correlate every emotion that sets up in this side of the body. Let me put these organ systems into somewhere where we know these things harbor. Like, what does the
Mhm.
heart govern? Like, what does the liver govern? Like, all these things, which Moore's obviously done extensive studies in. You won't know that answer. You'll be like, what in the world does my heart have to do with this? You know what I
Oh,
mean?
yeah.
Like, it's like, and I can't even tie it all together because it just comes to my brain. And then suddenly I'm like, da-da-da-da-da-da. That's all that God did over the last 8 years. But it is like really fascinating to try to, like, because that was the one thing I was like, I don't think I carry any shame for my divorce. I don't think I feel broken anymore. I'm not worried about my mother not wanting me, which was a big part of the heart thing in utero. I was
Yeah.
like, I'm really interested in how and why my heart rate goes into like an arrhythmia. And it was largely to do with like just like stuff with my son and like accusations. So I'm like, from a German new medicine point of view, I'm always curious like how, and when you help people find that stuff, it's just so fascinating.
Yeah, it is fascinating. And what's interesting is that, yeah, you'll go into a doctor and the best they'll give you is like, you're stressed, and then like write something on a prescription pad to like numb it all out. So
Yeah,
you're
like
not.
I went to the doctor and got like Lexapro, and like it was like, oh, well, you've been through trauma, you've been through rough divorce. It's like, no shit, I got that. Like, we're into that. But what's the specific?
Right, right. It didn't make me Lexapro deficient. But yeah, there's so many things like all blending together, which is one of the reasons why I was drawn to German New Medicine over. I had known about other mind body method like resources and things like that, but this one was so specific. Like, it was so like, here's the 3 or 4 things to consider, and you timeline like when did the symptoms appear, and you have the information about what's in healing, what's in conflict, and on top of that, having an idea of what to heal, what not to heal. Like, sometimes that healing phase can be dangerous. So you mentioned the heart. Like, going into healing, if it's been a big conflict that's been ongoing for a long time, we don't trained German New Medicine practitioners won't even touch that, because they will work with the surrounding things and let time heal that, because you
Yeah.
could actually have a heart attack in that healing process as part of the healing process. Same with like the pancreas. Those are areas that we specifically don't work with. But there's obviously, we're complex people. So there's lots of things around, lots of work that can be done that can just slowly bring the overall nervous system down. So that way, the natural healing that you go through during that process of heart specific or pancreas specific issues doesn't create such a huge healing crisis that you have either heart issues or like major blood sugar issues. But I
Yeah,
was going
that's
to
such a
say,
good. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's like so funny that doctors are so like moot on this, other than just like the generic term stress. But culturally, we have all of these phrases that align with even with German medicine, like the abandonment, the water retention, the weight gain from the kidneys
Yeah.
collecting, you're a fish out of water, or he got under my skin, or like that you can die of a broken heart, or like
Totally.
there's like little phrases that we have, and there's even like trauma having its own language. That's like a Mark Woolen concept, I believe, where in my training we worked through like this little exercise until you get to this phrase that just doesn't make sense. So when I did it for myself, my phrase that didn't make sense was I'm a shell of a person. I'm afraid of being a shell of a person. And I'm like, there's really nothing that's a shell of a person over here. Like, I'm deep, if anything. I go dancing. I have like lots of
do
friends
not
and
keep
all
it
kinds of
surface.
but I was just, I've gotten really good to be able to ask myself a question and trust the answer. And so I was like, who was that? And it was like, oh, your grandma on your dad's side. And then I like connected, like she became a single mom around the same age that I became a single mom in a totally different circumstance. Her husband died, but she then had to usher children, in her case, 13 children, through the grieving process while going through it herself. She never remarried. She never, like, as far as I know, had another romantic relationship. I know she was approached, like, but
Wow.
it just like, I was realizing, oh my gosh, I've been carrying my grandma's stuff. And I knew because I just started crying and crying and crying, passed a ton of parasites the next day. And I was like, wow, like, so your heart issue or like any kind of issue isn't even always ours. Sometimes it gives credence to the generational sin concept that like these things can be passed down. And we're even seeing in epigenetics, like we can see genetic markers being passed down. They've done that in mice studies, and they've actually seen that in human sperm as well, like markers, stress markers that were created on a man being imprinted on his sperm. So it's passed down to at least one generation in humans. We've seen it 3 generations in mice. I imagine the Bible tells us what, 7 generations, something like that.
7, yeah, or something like that, yeah. Isn't
Be
that so amazing? I mean, that is, to me, that's just like amazing. Like, I'm like, that information is just mind blowing. I mean, I do see that in my practice all the time, depending on how high a frequency is, or if there's a physical manifestation or a symptom or not on our devices. Usually I'm like, that's probably not yours. Like, that's probably not yours. That's probably out in your biofield, just because it's not yet become a body full manifestation. Like, how it'll show like an acute challenge, like, whatever it might be, but the person will say, oh, I don't have symptoms of that. Like, I don't have like high blood pressure. I don't have symptoms of that, or whatever, whatever we're looking at that there's an issue, or, I don't have gallbladder issues or whatever. And I'm like, well, if you keep going in these thought patterns, life patterns, habits, you very well might.
Yeah, right, exactly. So it's very
That's so
powerful to be
cool.
able to make connections between like the symptom and the interpretation, because so many things happen in that subconscious, like underneath the realm of our conscious awareness. And this is one of the reasons why I try to tell people, like, just don't bother doing affirmations, because if you're trying to like cram it in through your conscious, you won't be able to pull it down into the subconscious and like just live from that. You'll always be like trying to put a band-aid on something. So we start using hypnosis to take a memory, to neutralize it and change it into just a memory that we have a little bit of distance from, so that it's not still in our body. It's not still in like something we re-experience every time we think of, and then change it around a little bit, and then see, okay, well, what is here for us to learn? What are the healing codes that we can activate? And those come up from the client. I'm not telling the person like what to see. Can't you see this? They tell me what they see. And that's just like really powerful stuff, because then we clearing things out of the subconscious and just getting things into the conscious, so that we're working together with both parts of you.
Yeah. So, okay, let's talk about that, because I feel like I'm going to have the classic Christian crowd that's like, oh my God, hypnosis. No, you know what I mean? And I'm fine with that. I actually love that conversation about like vibes and all that stuff. So I mean, when it comes to hypnosis, you guys, I mean, you're changing a memory. Okay. So neuro-linguistic programming does it there. It's so funny. When you took me through that hypnosis the other day, I was thinking, I've done this before. I have an
Mhm.
NLP friend who's an NLP provide, not exactly what you were saying. I'm saying
Right.
I've done this in NLP. They do that. They replace visual imagery with a different visual, and you suddenly have a different neuro-linguistic program running. So
Yeah.
and my stuff is very similar in that I do a lot of brain training, brain reprogramming, with the ideas around who we are, made in the image of God, because those are obviously those key ideas. Like those are those ideas that you have to really come to terms with and believe. I mean, that's what, like, you can do all the prayer, all the meditation. It's like you said, all the willing you want to. And what really set me free from opinions or accusations or anything in my divorce, or even participation, because I'm still actively parenting with this person, was genuinely just deciding, who the hell am I right now? Like, and acknowledging, like, that, yeah, in that version of that person's story, that was true, right?
Mhm.
Like that was true. But I'm like, I mean, that story hasn't been true since the minute it happened. Like, I think a lot of people just get this like real overcomplicated confusion around, and this is what sets up dis-ease, right? Like
Yeah.
dis-ease that comes on. It's like people think it bang hits you when you have the symptom and you end up in the ER, you end up in the functional medicine, or you suddenly can't go to the bathroom or whatever it is. It's like, no, that's set up way back there 8 years ago or whatever the heck, when you were like doing, your belief system work. But it's so interesting because I can remember, like, something that I teach my clients now is I'm like, if God offers a new mercy every morning, right? Like, I don't even care what transition you use, but if there's a new start every day and that's the case, and like, if Jesus really did what he did, then why do you not start new every day? Like, I'll
Mhm.
literally break it down like that simple. You know what I mean? And like,
Yeah.
that is worth exploring, right? Like, you
Yeah.
have to then go unpack and forgive all the belief systems that you set up around yourself. Like, it's so interesting. Like, I'm like, I had so many belief systems set up around what my ex thought about how I mothered, belief
Mhm.
systems that created chronics the entirety of my new marriage for the first 5 years. You know what I mean? Like, and it was like interesting because with my new husband, we had a baby year one. And then we had a big health challenge, which was the heart stuff. And then we decided like 5 years later to have another baby that we had planned like year two. But it was like, okay, so it's just really interesting how I have lived that chronic experience,
Mhm.
like post divorce, and that, okay, now we're going to unpack this and have a choice. Like, are you going to be someone who's on Lexapro and Xanax? Are you really the addicted psycho, your mother, that your ex created that reality? Or what is your new reality? Like, and
Yeah.
I'm like, I think like I'm always curious, like, when people come to you, is that something that you're bumping into and addressing too? Like, is that something that you're like, hey, like, first of all, we got to wipe the slate clean of all this bullshit.
Yeah, that's what I'm using the hypnosis for, is that like
That's so cool.
what a person is bringing. And hypnosis is literally nothing other than a deep state of relaxation. So
Yeah.
you always have control. If something gets to be too much or you get to the place where you're uncomfortable, you just open your eyes. That's all you do, is you open your eyes. And sometimes people get hypnosis confused with like what they've seen in movies where they hypnotize a person into becoming like an assassin and they don't even know that they're doing these things. And like, that is not
Yeah.
even hypnosis. That is brainwashing, which would involve like abuse. It would involve isolation. It would involve like all of these things that is not happening on a Zoom call between you and me.
Yeah.
And
You're
so,
saying like you don't have the power to MK Ultra somebody in like 5 minutes.
no,
Damn
no,
it.
absolutely. No power, no desire, no anything. And on top of that, those things have to continue to go to keep those programs active, in my opinion. Like, I'm going to give you the tools over 6 weeks to use these tools and know when to use them to heal yourself. And then you are on that healing path to continue to usher yourself through. And so sometimes we are just pulling in like a story and like learning to work with it and kind of the process that you described. And then you realize like, oh my gosh, I've been letting this person tell me who I am. And I have this underlying agreeing thing in my subconscious that I can flip off. I can turn that off and start to decide like, I'm going to be who I'm going to be. And that person is using a distorted reality, and I don't even care if it's true. So we have some other things with like learning to work with and lean into certain connections, learning to Kelly Brogan calls it like put on your villain crown, where you're just like, yes, I am the person who didn't do what you wanted to do, and that makes you think that I'm a terrible person. And fine, I'll be that terrible person for you because I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing and like have the power in that, and not let their words or their perception of you affect you. Just don't have that connection with them anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think? Like we were talking about, the people who lose their whole social circles and all that. And another thing that I think is really interesting is like when people are going through that I mean, they often perceive that that's like that loss is like this state of forever, or that's where the fear is, or that's where they stop the work. Like that's, I mean, it's tempting. Like I get it. Like that's like the part where the work really gets challenging, like, but what's so cool is that if you look at nature and what nature does, on a cyclical cycle, even right now, it's like perfect example because we're in the fall. Like nature's going to drop its leaves to make space for new growth. It's like that's the very basic thing. Like I laugh because I'm like, yeah, I had to tear down a lot of identities, a lot, and then build them back. But I also in the process got this cool experience of like trying on quite a lot more that I had never tried on before. Like I always joke around, I'm like, I mean, I tried on a lot of identities. Like I'm like, okay, am I like this Bible study mom? No. Like I'm that for like, I was that for like a couple months until I wasn't. Like it's like something I see in my practice is this like need for people to like root down. I actually just had this conversation with my daughter today and my husband. It's like there's a tendency in certain people that they, this is how I phrase it to my daughter. She's having a real struggle with, not loving her school, and that's her story to tell, but it's like it's hard. And I'm like, we were saying, I was like, if you don't love your school, you try a new school. If it doesn't work out, you try a different one. Like I'm all about seeing something through. Like I'm about a commitment. Like the other day she got taken out of her place in cheer and she was like, I'm quitting. It's like, no, like, because you never know what's on the other side. If you don't sort of like, you can't quit in this is what I tell my kids. If it is chaos, it's not Jesus. You cannot quit in chaos. Like that was one thing that happened in my divorce. I realized that I chaotically quit versus just manning up and being like, I can peacefully exit. Like there's a serious need for people to get addicted to chaos, right? And it's like I told my daughter, I'm like, you can be mad, you can be stressed about what your coach did in cheer, like whatever, but you're not going to chaotically quit 5 minutes after practice like the two other girls did, because that's not a life lesson. Like if I want to exit a friendship and all that, like it's going to be peaceful. It needs to be peaceful. There needs to be closure. There needs to be no dis-ease, discord to the best of your ability, right? Somebody just leaves you and you can't control that. Like that's the other person. So this isn't what we're talking about. But I like said to her today, she was like, well, like she has a tendency to not even want to start something because she doesn't know if she's going to see it all through. And I laugh because that's something that my ex is like instilled in her. And I'm like, who does that? Like, I'm like, I told her, I'm like, no, you pay for college like semester by semester. So if you don't like it, you can come home. Like we haven't paid for 4 years of you to go somewhere. That was my experience, but I'm like, that's not her experience. And she's like, oh, so like once you pick a college, you don't stay the whole time. I'm like, well, that's always the goal, but you might not. Like we have to be okay with flow state when things happen in our lives. Like this is like the conversation that I'm having 24/7. I feel like with clients is like, The second you think, I have a client right now, I love, love her so much. But the second you think, hey, I've been doing this a year, I've got a real handle on it, something crazy happens that's out of your control,
Yeah.
right? Something new. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, I realized that over the summer. Like, I'm like, and it can feel discouraging. Like, but in that discouragement, you have a choice. I literally just told my husband this today. I was like, God, I had felt like we got into like a 3-year good place, not an amicable place, but a good place, and then suddenly just boom, like shitloads of chaos ensued over the summer. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and it's just like it was so interesting, like fleshing that out and telling Frank, I'm like, I was like, that's life though. That's literally it'd be like that. Like we
Yeah.
don't have this sense of security that we think we have. So much do you feel like with your clients too, you see that dis-ease because there's resistance to the flow or to the healing or to the other side of the process. Like we all know those friends who they stay in super shit marriages. Like they
Mhm.
stay in them. I'm not advocating leaving marriages lightly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Lord knows I don't do that at this phase of my life. I've been remarried for 10 years and I'm happy, but I
Yeah.
won't lie to you that it's not easy.
Yeah. Yeah. I think,
You know?
well, I think what's really hard for people like moving on is the always looking back, and being like, oh, I didn't catch these warning signs. Will I be able to catch them again? Wanting connection, wanting love, not sure if they want to go back into the dating scene. Sometimes when they do, they're dating like a 16-year-old and not like the mature 40-year-old. Ask me how I know. Like, it took me a minute to be like, oh my gosh, I am acting like I was, a long time ago. Well, it's time to grow up. But even just ruminating and like keeping on, I mean, time is supposed to heal all wounds, but there are some wounds that are like healing like 0.5% a year. And it's like, I
Yeah.
like know women who are like have been
And
sharing
healing for 10
stories.
years. You're like,
Yeah, their divorce is like 10, 20 years old and they still are like trying to process through it. And like, okay, well, listen, there's some other ways to go about this because what you're doing is not working. So,
yeah.
so like that's what I'm teaching women is like grab how to identify the things to like focus on, to work on using symptoms or using like your own visceral reaction to a memory. What to do about that, how to take yourself through that process, how to like develop some simple like self-love practices. And I'm all about fake it till you make it. Like just the day-to-day getting up, getting dressed, having a self-care routine once a week, which I've been talking about like for, I don't know, feels like forever. But just
You're
having
so
that
good
little,
at
thank you. I mean, it is like the 7-year look back where I'm like, oh yeah, that's when I started kind of like choosing to love myself. And like faking it all along the way until I have, the experience like I had with my neighbor the other day where I'm like, oh my gosh, I do. And yeah, just, I wanted to share that with women so that they don't have to stay so stuck and so that they don't have to stay like continuing the cycle so that they can start to see, like with your daughter in the cheer example, there may have been a good reason why the coach moved her, not because she was being bad or not succeeding or whatever. It may have been like, oh my gosh, it just hit me. Or probably
Totally.
it just hit me. You would go really well here. And like, she's in
I
her
know.
story of, I must not be good enough. Well, when you change it to like, oh, I'm going to try you out here because I think this might be a really good place for you. That's a totally different perspective. But when you're in the middle of a trigger and you're in the middle of your old hurt and those subconscious stories, you just can't see it. So shifting out of that is like where the work is. And it actually sounds really profound. It is a profound shift, but it's a very ordinary process. It's very, very low key, like a little bit of journaling, a little bit of asking yourself the right questions, a little bit of like have an exercise called learn from what you hate, where it's just like, okay, well now let's take that ex that you're like in constant conflict with and like learn from it. Who's a better teacher? Like, okay, right there, right? That reframe is a totally different situation. And then you start to get tapped into what you yourself need and what you yourself is looking for, what you yourself, it's a learning about yourself through this experience that you have no control over how that person is acting, but you sure can use it as an exercise.
Yeah, I'm interested because I mean, I know that this offer just kind of like downloaded to you and you're like, this is what I want to do. But, like, because everybody is going to bring a different thing to the table, right? Like it's so interesting. I have a client right now who it's like I don't see many people who their big trigger necessarily was a divorce, but this was hers, but it was 20 years ago. Like 20 years ago. Like we're like still hearing about it to the point of chronic illness and relationships being struggle and all that stuff. And it's like, okay, like do you want to go to your grave with this kind of challenge? Like,
Right.
like, are we just like ready to let it go? Like, it's like, and at some point, you just like, you do just have to make a choice to like literally get out of the processing phase. I was just talking to a client about that the other day. I'm like, I mean, which honestly, you should use an expert to do if you can't do it yourself. That's a perfect example. Cause I have a client, I was telling her the other day, she was like, different client, and she's like, she's doing a lot of inner child work postpartum. She's like really going amazing, but it's creating a lot of thyroid issues, hair loss, blah, 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 while she's doing this work because the work is intense. It's intense. And I'm like, and she's the type that if you like she'll scroll, build a list of 10 things, knock it out. Like she's like me. Like I am like, that was me. Like when I first approached health, it was like, it was my job. Like it was like, I can heal. How are we going to do it? Let's get it all together. Let's do it. And then I'm like, you forget how much support you need in the interim, like emotionally, like sometimes mineral wise, like, is your diet okay for that type of energy? You know what I mean? Like you need that support. But I'm sure that you'll find like just the whole gamut of situations because we all know those people who, like you were like, I'm leaving my marriage, and you cognitively decided and made a plan and left it. You know what I mean? Like you weren't left.
Yeah.
Flip side, we have other, okay, back up. Yeah, I'm not discounting the trauma that may have happened between there, but I'm saying you were like, I'm leaving at that point. And it's like, we all have those people who were like left against their will, you know what I mean? Or those people who faced like, that type of situation. So when you come in contact with those different situations and you work with your clients, do you really do you meet with them to narrow down like what their specific situation is, at least at this point in time, and like you're working their specifics? Or is this like, hey, people with divorce tend to struggle with the common thing, and that's like, we can help you this way?
Well, we're doing 1-to-1 right now for this round. So 1-to-1, we are focusing on a specific thing. But to be honest, I don't let them go deep into it. I don't let them tell me the whole story from the beginning to the end. And this is, it all started when I was 5 and my dad, like, I have that experience. I'm not really trying to make fun of it because that is true, but I don't need to know it. So you actually don't need me there to really be knowing deeply this whole thing. How would I ever know that whole thing? But we just take piece by piece. So I have them bring, my guarantee is that we will change one memory that had been making you cry and change it to like a neutral response when you think about that in that first week. So how much could I really even know in a first week? I don't need to know that. I just need you to bring that memory, that one memory. And you don't even have to tell me that much about it. I have you do a little bit of like writing down your own, just like to get really clear on the memory, because sometimes they blend together and we start talking about this one and then we want to talk about 4 others. We're talking about the one. So the like writing down, the exercise that we do is to get you really focused on that one memory. And then we start working with it. And you need to share surprisingly little with me, if none, to be able to change this memory around. So like, I just remind people, like, if you've been talking about this and are still in the processing, then talking is not your way out. This is why counselors will use so many other modalities, EMDR and things like that, is because just talking about stuff is like the slowest way to not make much effort, much change rather. I mean, people keep going because they notice changes. Like I'm not trying to say that nothing is happening, but there are very much more effective, faster ways to go at it. And then also reminding people like, yes, this is quick, and in an hour you're seeing a huge change, but don't do this every day. Like, you're going to have some healing time. So like, let your body recalibrate. We do like a long session and a short session. So like the long session will be like kind of one of those bigger works, and then the next session might be like a nervous system like strategy that you learn where like you can take and use throughout your day. And so we're just like stair stepping down the healing process so you don't end up in bed for like 3 weeks with like a fever or something. Like that's one of the ways German New Medicine helps me like make sure that people stay functional through the process and know what to expect, like how to take care of themselves if they are in bed for a few days.
Yeah, I mean that's the interesting part why a lot of people don't charge through, because we've got this supercharged fear of symptoms, right? And this like supercharged distrust in things. And look, I'm the first person to understand you got to show up at work to make money. Like I get it. But there is also like a divine provision and divine experience that we're afforded when we take the time to heal. Like you often reemerge as a version of yourself that can be more productive, more capable. Your capabilities are bigger. Like we've like all seen that. Like I'm like, I see that in myself all the time. Like I'm like, it's never fails that when I'm in a season of like, I mean, I don't really get any seasons of like down, but I'm saying if I'm in a season of like, hey, like whether that's 2 days or, 2 weeks of like need a break, even if it's just mentally, even if it's just brain reframing. Like I told just before this, I was having a call with someone and I was like, there's like that camp of people who's like, when they say slow down, they're like, stop their life. You know what I mean? Like that very hippie, like we're stopping. Like my midwife keeps telling me like, are you like taking breaks? I'm just worried you're doing too much. I'm like, I have 6 children and 2 companies. Like there is no physical break. Like I'm like, but like what's funny is I stopped needing the physical break because now I'm good at the mental break, right? Like I'm good at drinking my water slow. I'm good at digesting my food. Like I'm good at these things that and I'm mindful when I'm not. So like it's so funny because like I'm having like a divorce trigger right now, literally in my own life, and I'm not digesting like food. I'm not in rest and digest when I sleep. I'm getting like acid reflux like at night. And I'm like, oh, that's so interesting. And every night at 11 p.m., I'm getting textbook gallbladder nausea. Like I'm getting nausea. And so I'm like, oh, rage much? Like that's really like, oh, like I was literally on German New Medicine on learninggnm.com last night because of you, because you inspired me. And I was like, what is the root of nausea, liver, gallbladder? I was like looking it all up. I'm like, okay, like this all tracks.
Yes. That's what made me like really get hooked in, because I studied German New Medicine for at least 2 years before I ever started talking about it or using it in my practice. And it was taking me that much time to be like, okay, does this track? When I mention this to a friend or a colleague or a client, do they go, oh yeah, like that moment when they have that like feeling and that like, and you almost feel it, like even though it's their thing, you almost feel it in your body too. You're like, we hit it. Like we hit that spot. And it's just started happening so often, way more than like, I mean, I've had that moment with other modalities, but like, this is just like, I'm not saying that every single time it is, but like, yeah, we usually can like really hit on something. And if we don't hit on something, then sometimes it's just not yours. And we have to maybe go a little deeper into the family history or even just feel through it. But to the point of like taking the time to heal through it, like it's fascinating how long we can resist feeling and healing and like just feeling through it. And then when we finally decide to do it, it's like I'll set a timer for 10 minutes and I don't even need those 10 minutes. And I'm like, oh, I could have resisted this for 10 days, 10 weeks, 10 years, or I could have spent 10 minutes like actually in it, feeling it in my body, breathing into it. Did you know that Ruka de Kucha is the Aramaic term for Holy Spirit? It's usually translated into Holy Spirit. So it's Ruka de Kucha, and Aramaic is just this really fascinating, like energetic language. It's just very, very nuanced. But another way to translate that exact term is holy breath.
Ah, yeah.
And like the breathing through it is so effective. I've heard people call it the great reprocessor, where like just breathing That's like our one thing that we go to so much. Every single exercise that we do is breathing, breathing, breathing. If I'm going to say something that's going to like maybe expand somebody's mind, I'm like, okay, let's take a few breaths first. I got something to say. Let's make sure we're ready for it, and let's breathe through it as we digest it and think about it and like process that. Like the breath is so powerful, and it's wild how fast it is. And yeah, I think absolutely like letting myself just have those times when I need to stay in bed and when I have a fever and when I have the runny nose or whatever it is, that it has been that part of that ordinary process that's brought extraordinary transformation.
Yeah, yes. Where you don't step in and be like, I got to shut this down as fast as I can and get productive again. Like, I mean, I know that's like easier said than done, but yeah, I mean, I actually see a lot of people. It's so interesting. The reason, like, we can back up to why people, I call it storytelling, you know, like when people are so into like telling you their whole story and blah, blah. But if you notice, it's usually for a couple reasons. It'll be so you can't talk, right? Like if
Yeah.
they're, and you can muscle test that. Like if they're like not wanting, if they're not quite ready or they're not comfortable or they're used to control, it's like they will just keep the floor. You know what I mean? Like, and this is like
Yeah.
part of what I learned in sales. It's like they'll just keep the floor the whole time so that they can like avoid, which is like high level avoidance.
Yeah. Yeah.
The
So is
other
the
thing is
busyness.
like, what?
So is the busyness. Like I can't rest. I can't lay down. I need to suppress these
Totally.
symptoms. So like I've done it. I've like, that's what put me into adrenal fatigue, was always needing to do. But go on about
Well, no, I mean, I
needing
think
to
it's
tell a
amazing that
story.
you can posture yourself not in that way as a single mom, because a lot of single moms, they have that identity, right? Like they're like, I genuinely cannot take a break. Like I cannot take a break because, and while some of that is true,
Mhm.
I know quite a lot of people in marriages who genuinely can also not take a break. Like, I mean,
Right.
me and my husband just got good at that. I mean, I tell this story and like with his permission, and we just got good at that over the last 2 years. But the entire reason why I decided to do coffee enemas was not because I had researched all the benefits and was super convicted. It was survival, because I never had 15 minutes to myself. Like I was
Yes.
holding everything down,
Yes.
finances, bills, our lives. And I'm not saying he inflicted that on me. I'm not playing the victim. I was very controlling myself, but I'm saying like I was holding down so much schedules, school
Yeah.
pickups and drop offs. I just got into 3 different schools. It was like, God, like it was just so much. And I'm like, I tell everybody, I'm like, the reason I did so many coffee enemas was because that time was so freaking peaceful. Like, I'm like, I mean,
Yes.
my husband was like, no, like if you've got something up your butt, I'm not going to come bother you. Like,
Yes.
you know?
Same thing with my baths. When I started doing the weekly bath, just
Yeah.
like hell or high water, no matter how I felt, if I had good week, bad week, I took a bath, I said, on Sunday mornings or Sunday evenings. And at the end, I just told my husband at the time, I'm like, I'm going to do that. And he's like, okay. I'm like, whatever stopped me from the beginning obviously was me. It was not him. There was literally 0% resistance to that at all. And like it just became something that he knew was happening, and like never once complained about it, like through the whole rest of our marriage. When I was doing that, it was never like an issue. I just had been in this mode of can't rest, can't sit down, won't let myself, I'm not performing enough.
Yes. Oh my gosh. The same. I'm like, that is like, I even have a tendency now. Like, I'm like, I just want to work like all through the evening because I didn't get enough done. And my husband will be like,
Yeah.
I mean, you have time during the day, but I feel like, you know, we all feel like if we put it off or whatever, but living in that constant state of forward motion is just a nervous system
Too much.
nightmare.
It is. So like being able to not to get yourself out of that as either single or married is critical. It's actually why I started with the Vibrant Way and focused on living in overwhelm and like how you can step yourself out of that. And now I actually give that to women who are doing the divorce course so that they can do that, because that's a lot of the big fake it till you make it kind of like, I'm building myself back up through these simple practices of reframing my mind, finding the stolen moments that I call them stolen moments because it's like convenient, but you're giving away that time. If you are sitting at a stoplight and you get out your phone to see what's going on Instagram, TikTok, or what text you've gotten, you are giving away a minute, 2 minutes when you could be breathing. You could be like just letting your brain rest. And that is a choice that you're making. Sometimes I make that choice consciously. I like get out my phone, but most of the time I'm like, oh no, I'm going to choose to sit here and be in stillness at the stoplight and be grateful for the gift of the stillness at the stoplight, rather than in my story about I'm hitting every stoplight. I'm like, yes, I'm hitting every stoplight.
Isn't it so funny? It just basically boils down to like life joy. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like I'm like, whenever I literally like decided to like be a different person, I was like, I literally am just like not joyful. And almost everybody I see in a chronic is like in this state of like either victimhood or has forgotten joy. Like I'm like, guys, there's a clear-cut reason why in the Bible it says we need like a childlike faith. Okay. Like we need an approach that is like joyful, you know, like we don't need simple. This whole like and simple. Oh my gosh.
It's childlike, it's gotta be simple. Yeah.
I know. We're out there teaching that all the time.
Just don't even, and I again, like this has been part of my learning. So that's part of the reason why I can pass this on, is that not thinking about what you want, just thinking about what you don't want. I don't want to be in this conflict. I don't want to be in this fight. I don't want to be in this like whatever, but then seeing like, oh, well, I do want to have peace. I do want to have joy. I do want to have blah, blah, blah. And like, where can I do that? And if you can cut out the chronic stress or the reactivity or the whatever, and like replace that with some of these other things, then that's a huge win.
Oh, super huge. I mean, I find myself in that pattern all the time. Like, I mean, not all the time, but like have to kick my ass out of that pattern. Like, I'll be like, me and my husband just had that combo on the way. He's like, why don't you talk less about what you don't want? I'm like, okay, like I will do that. And he's like, it was just a simple situation of like coming up with a migraine, you know, it was like no big deal. But I'm like, I was like in this spiral of like, okay, like here's what's happening, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, I'm not trying to discount your experience, but if you don't want the migraine anymore, maybe you should just let it go. And I'm like, yes, okay, cool. Like I actually can just kick it out of my, you know.
Well, like going back to the children, like children do not process don't want. So telling your kid like don't hit your brother doesn't work as well as if you say put your hand in your pocket, or like here, go get that toy, and giving them something, telling them something else to do with their hands. And our subconscious is just so childlike. Like the same thing, it's not going to process the same things as like, oh, I don't want to be in fear. It's going to process like whatever you want to substitute fear with, like, oh, I trust, or I am proactive, or whatever it is. So thinking, reframing like what you do want, that's a huge tool as well.
Yeah. So in your 6 weeks, are you hoping, so this is something that I'm interested in, because I also have clients who they latch on to like these timelines. You know, you got to be all careful what you say to people. Like she's like, oh, my guru said it took her a year to heal, so it's gonna take me a year. I was like, it could take you a day, it could take you a week. Like like if you're open to the work, like God's working in the infinite time, you know, like it's like that doesn't really matter. I mean, other things are sticky. Yes, you might get triggered, but what you walk women through is like 6 weeks, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then go ahead.
I was going to say it's 6 weeks of learning strategies. So by the end of those 6 weeks, just from learning those strategies and applying them, even once or twice, you can notice a huge difference in those 6 weeks. So, but it's supposed to be tools that you continue to use, like as you need to them. And I have found that I need them less and less as I use them more and more at the beginning. And now I might go away from one of those tools and then come back to it later. But it's something that you have forever when something sticky comes up, because I mean, a lot of us are involved, are essentially life partners with our exes, whether we want to be or not, because we have children with them. And so even after they're done with school, after they're living on their own, there's going to be marriages, there's going to be, you know, all of these different situations when you're going to come into contact with that person. And it is time, you know, every time you come into contact with them, it might be a new layer that comes up. So let's have that tool at your disposal forever. That's what we're doing in the 6 weeks. It's different than a counseling session where where they're trying to usher you through that, handhold you through that. It's more like a class where you're learning some tools and some strategies that you can be using forever.
Yeah, I love that. I think there's like we have a real problem these days with distraction and like guru hopping, which I'm not
Yes.
like saying that people should use multiple. I'm not saying that I need to be your authority on healing. That's not what I'm
Yeah.
saying. But I'm saying that we don't allow very much of the Holy Spirit to orchestrate that timing, or we're not in that flow state of it. So like, for example, you should not be walking around in a constant state of triggered. Like that's something that I shepherd my clients through all the time. I'm like they'll be like, I'm triggered every day. I'm triggered. I'm like, that's your problem. Like that's
Yeah.
not everyone's trying to trigger you. Like you're obviously either hyper vigilant or you're a victim or things like that. So we got to figure that out. I'm like, you're not walking around in a state of triggered for one, because if you're walking around in a state of triggered, you're creating chaos somewhere. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, and like people will be like, how do you do that? I'm like, how I did it with my ex was like really easy. Like I call it opting out of one fight at a time. Like I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
and like, or the very one thing I tell myself now, which is like overarching, is just like, if it's chaos, don't participate. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I am really good at that now, like in my
Yeah.
life. And it's like,
Yeah, you are.
no matter how crazy the conflict gets, like, I mean, and we're talking, I've had my children, move out. We've had the conversation of, oh, I want to live with somebody else, like that we've had some of those pretty biggies happen now that we've gone into kind of the teen tween years.
Mm-hmm.
And, we've got situations like phones and cars on the horizon in just a few short months, and things were leveraged. Like that is a harder thing to walk, but ultimately you still cannot function in a state of triggered. If I'm always the one that's being triggered, I look like the idiot. Like that's like, I'm not helping shepherd my kids. I'm not in a leadership role. That's what I tell my clients. That's how I think about it. It's like, it's our job to lead our kids. And it's so funny because the more that I operate in it, the more I realize that like, it's actually the other person that's creating the chaos that's triggered. Like it's actually not me. Like I don't feel triggered. It's like the other person needs to generate chaos. You know what I mean?
And when you're triggered, your IQ goes way down. Like you're just not smart anymore, and you have no capacity, no access to those creative solutions. I was talking to a colleague yesterday, and the thing that she was saying, and I know you see this too in your practice, I certainly see it, is that people do those provider hopping because they want somebody to come and fix them. They're doing pill for an ill, but with provider, when what they really need to do is take the time and sit down. Like I can teach people these exercises for 6 weeks and it'll be money down the drain for them if they never sit down and use it.
Yeah.
And so that's why I'm kind of starting with like working with people one-on-one, but like ultimately, even if I handhold you through a Zoom call every single day, if you're not going to sit down and like just sit with it and allow yourself to like deeply feel what's in your body as a response, and like face the fear of, what if I start crying, will I ever stop? I'm going to tell you, nobody has died of crying in this entire world to my knowledge. It
Never
will
happened.
stop at some point. Nobody cried themselves to death. Like that's not a thing.
No, that is not a
Probably be
thing.
a lot shorter than you think. It may be days, you might, depending on what all you have to release, you might be crying for like off and on for a few days, but it might be like 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there. Like even when I had that release from the inherited trauma, it was just like 5 or less minutes and at a time, and it lasted an evening, just because I let myself like really fully, I've come to really fully let myself sit through it and cry in front of people and cry in Costco, cry on my walks, like wherever. I'm like, I don't care who sees me cry anymore, because it's my time to have it right now. My body needs it right now.
Yeah, that's something that I'm actually trying to implement in my own life at the moment. Cause I had put on some emotional weight that I ended up thinking was like, well, I was told, okay, lymphatics. Funny enough, my lymphatics usually scan up pretty great on my device. So I was like, I didn't think I had this huge lymphatic like stress or problem, but what I did have was quite a lot of suppressed tears, mucus, things that, maybe films, whatever things. And I was like, oh yeah, like that tracks. I have like cellulite and I have like some face puffiness. I mean, I still have a little bit of face puffiness, but I'm like, and then when I got pregnant and went through that 6-week detox of like just literally all the mucus like leaving my body, I'm like, holy crap, like
Yeah.
this stuff just wants to come out. Like, I'm like, this stuff, it has to have an exit point, you know what I mean? At some point. And it's like so funny because I noticed myself like slimming down after baby. Like, I'm like, oh, I'm not like retaining a bunch of fluid anymore. Like, I'm like moving it on out of there, you know? But it's like you're always going to have God, especially with a divorce. It's like you said, you're in it for life. Especially if you have kids with a person, you're going to have stuff that's going to come up and you need tools. Like you need tools. You're not deficient in needing to like go layer on a bunch of pills or medication or whatever. But it's so nice to have like when something comes up that you can pull from and just be like, okay, like this is how we handle this scenario, right? Like it doesn't have to be complicated. Like my scenario is not complicated. Sometimes my scenario is just putting my phone on airplane mode until I can get my mind right about not responding. Like
Oh,
it
that's so
is
powerful. Like this is
very
mute
easy.
for an hour.
Yeah. Like people will be like, how do you not respond to your ex? I'm like, first of all, I did the work around the opinions he has about me. I don't care. I'm like untriggerable. I mean, he could maybe say something that would really, really be challenging for me, but I'm saying I'm like at this point, like very far removed from his opinions because in my rational mind, I'm like, we divorced for a reason and I actually don't have to care.
Yeah.
Hallelujah.
Yes.
Like
That's
I'm
the
like,
freedom you were after.
Yeah. Also, I mean, flip side, had he left me, I probably would have been like relieved. But I'm saying, if I got left by a person, because I know what's gonna happen. We're gonna have the Chelsea. You don't understand because you haven't been left. I actually told my client this the other day. I was like, I'm not gonna go toe to toe with you on who's had the most trauma. Like, I'm not gonna compete in trauma. Like, I'm like, I have been left by people. I do understand that loss pattern. Like, I'm like, and I still wouldn't play the victim. I still would be looking for what was ahead of me versus what was behind me, which is what I think me and you are constantly telling people, you know, to move into, right? It's like what's ahead, what's different, what's new. I always also like a Christian way I phrase that is like, how's God going to write that restoration story if you never live a story? Like it makes no sense. If you're always in the old story, how does he write the new one? Like that doesn't make any sense to me. And I have been in multiple scenarios now that were very similar to ones in my marriage with my current husband, because believe it or not, and your chaos will follow you. It will, like until you heal it, there's stuff that'll happen. And allowing God to write that restoration story and working through it with, you know, having tools and symptoms and letting them come up has been just the best. I mean, you talk about parasite pool, we do a whole podcast on that.
Yes, the best parasite work is work. I mean, I tell people, and this didn't come from me. This came from the first guy that I ever like did a personal development anything with. His name is Dr. Michael Rice. He has no social media presence whatsoever, unfortunately, but he should because his stuff is gold, and he's the one talking about the Aramaic stuff. And he made the point, like, if you're having this repeated argument, this repeated situation, this repeated thing that's happening in your life, like people keep abandoning me, people keep lying to me, people keep whatever, the common denominator and all of that is you.
Absolutely.
That can be a hard pill to swallow. You're like, that's one you got to breathe through maybe for a minute or 30 seconds or so. And then you realize like, oh, well, actually the only person that I have control over is me. And the only place where I have control is not in the past. You can't change the past. Nobody can, but is in my future. So me doing the work so that I come to that exact moment again, because I think my opinion is that God keeps giving us these opportunities to like heal. So like if you keep pulling it in, it's just God being like, oh, okay, well, we didn't pass that one yet. Let's just do it again. And like it's not a judgment at all. Like you would with a math problem. Like when I was homeschooling my kids, I would give them like 3 or 4 math problems. Like if you can solve all of these, then we'll move on. You don't have to do it. If not, then you'll just do like more until you get it. Like it's this practice until you have the skill. So you can build those skills, you can change your perspective. And then when you come to that same moment, that same argument, that same situation, and you do something different, you say something different, you do sometimes different is nothing. Like you said, giving yourself time and space to not respond and contribute to the chaos, that's fire. It's like,
Totally.
oh my gosh. Oh my
I know.
gosh.
You know what makes me so happy? It makes me so happy when I'm like, I actually just literally love your ability to be able to like evaluate and take action, because that's really what you got to do, like in your health, in your wellness, in your life. Like, I mean, we've talked about it with homeschooling. You just brought up your homeschooling. It's like you realize at some point that if you wanted to heal, you weren't going to hold all the balls together. Like all of your, you know what I mean? Like your general plan that we hold so freaking tightly, like has to change. Like it has to change. It doesn't mean you compromise your values, but I see so many people who are so afraid of just, well, we were just talking about it with my daughter, afraid of that action and afraid of the, like try it. If it doesn't work, exit it, right? Like, but afraid to make any little changes.
Yeah.
That they get into the state of just, the conflict's always there. It stays because they won't do a new therapy. They won't try a coffee enema. They won't let the homeschooling thing go. I mean, I'm not anti homeschooling. I'm saying I don't homeschool in my life. I don't homeschool, didn't homeschool during COVID, didn't have any plans to, unless shit got real bad.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, the learning for me was in the joint custody, which a lot of people, they're like, oh, love when you talk about joint custody and and it being a learning and a gift, because I quite frankly hate it. Like, I mean, I get the tendency to hate it. It does suck. Like, it sucks to have to not have your kids 100% of the time. There are elements of it that suck. There's usually parenting plan elements that you're not that jazzed about. Like, there are things that suck about it. But it has taught me and refined me also a lot about my own tendencies to control, like how much I can really trust God. Like, I mean, because during COVID, my ex-husband holds a school district. So my kids were forced to stay in schools that I did not like. Like initially I was like, I'll take on homeschooling because it's something that I'm like performance oriented me. I'm like, that's what we're doing, like, but what I realized is like, actually that was creating more chaos for myself. I was a full-time working national sales director, and at the time the breadwinner of my family. Like, I don't know how I was that crazy to think that I would like also take on homeschooling. But thank God, number one, I didn't have the option. Number two, I did though with our youngest who was in preschool, and I was like, well, whatever, we'll just, wing that. Like, that's like experience based.
You don't even need to be in school, preschool. Let them play.
Yeah, I know. It's like, whatever, we'll start that in first grade. Surely COVID will be over by then. But it was like, it was one of those things that was like, thank God for that. Thank God for that gift, because, and so much of this reframe is like my favorite thing to do, because I'm like, that was a straight gift. One, I didn't get nervous system insane, and we kept making a lot of money during COVID, which was obviously a blessing. With 2 job losses, starting a new company during COVID has been the best thing that's ever happened. 2, I was able to change policy at our school, like for the kids. Like, I was able to change temp gun policy, temperature guns pointed at the head policy. I was able to change things. I was able to bring like other layers to our school, and like that was a gift. You know what I mean? Like, I was like, there's a place at our school for our kids. There's a place for Jesus to be here, not me, like being in that Jesus position. I think that's so interesting, because when it comes to being chronic, a lot of being chronic, it's not a punishment thing, but we bring it on because we think it's our destiny, It's like our state of being.
Yeah. Yeah. And it will feel like it, because you haven't, Jung says, until you make the unconscious conscious, you'll be ruled by it, and you'll call it fate. Like, I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember exactly, but like,
no, true.
You do think it's your destiny, because you're pulling in this opportunity to learn this lesson over and over and over again. And you just haven't like next leveled yet. Next level. It's another chance. It's another chance. It's another chance.
I know. And it is so cool to do that level up. I mean, I told Frank the other day, laughing on the way I was like, I'm so tired of pain. I'm so tired of it. Like, I don't want to learn any more lessons through pain. Like, I'm good. Like, I was like, and I was only having like a little baby migraine. I wasn't having like real serious pain, but I was like, it's just been one thing after another. And he's like, you're really slipping into like a vibe that's not cute. I mean, everybody's gonna be like, get divorced. That's so mean. No,
Yeah.
it's like it was funny though, because it's like he's right. Like it was like a very disempowered, sad vibe versus just being like, I'm provided for, I'm sitting in a car, my husband's driving me to a competition that I don't even have to drive. Like I'm not stranded somewhere trying to wait out a migraine.
Yeah.
Like there was all kinds of things that were being really good, but it's so hard to see that in the moment. So I love that you're out there like helping people see that, operate in it, learn to live in it, like live in it as a lifestyle.
Yeah. I love that you're able to laugh at that, because laughter is such a powerful tool. Like sometimes, like I was thinking about a conversation I had with somebody the other day, and I was like, you know what? I really could have leaned into that connection in like a funny way. Whereas I leaned into it in like a critical, like, because I was in that like mode. I was uncomfortable. I was not feeling good. I was like detoxing from sugar or whatever. It always makes me think for like, at like hour 36, when I stopped eating sugar, I'm like, the world is terrible. It's the worst thing. And I can laugh about it. I can make fun of it now. And like next time I hit it, I'm like, oh yeah, this is the world is terrible moment. And it's just the sugar. But I was like, oh man, I had one of those moments where I was like, oh, like over a year later, I'm like, this is what I could have said. That would have been really funny. But but I was just so whatever in my mind. And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna have to like keep that in my back pocket, the laughter, like when I'm mad about something, like what's funny about this actually? Like
I mean, laughter has been my best tool. It's been something that I've like brought into my life because I really was told by a naturopath that we both know. He was like, you learned at the age of 3 that it was time to get serious, that everybody was chaotic and that there was no room for play. And he's right. Like I had like 2 addict parents and it was just very stressful, very tumultuous. And like there was one event that kicked that off. And then from there on, it was like, okay, this is crazy. Like playtime's over. And I see that pattern in ton of clients, but like it took me practicing in a lot of discomfort to bring that like joy back into my life, especially in my marriage, because we had a very serious driven marriage. Like we were like very connected on hard. Like, when we met, like my husband was lonely. He just gotten divorced like a couple years ago. Like I was a single mom and that was arguably so freaking hard. Like I'll never downplay how hard that is. Like hard in a fact of like, I can acknowledge it without sitting here and being victimized by it. I'm just saying it was hard. Like it was like hard to be the sole provider. Like there was challenges, and so it was, we connected on all that hard. Then it was like, just in your life, you have these choices like where you can look at what's hard all the time. And it's really tempting. Like it was like, for us, it seemed like everything was just hard all the time. And then somewhere along the way, I just realized I'm like, this is a perception thing. Like this is like, and not in a way of like toxic positivity, but in a way of like, hey, like I can like love my husband for who he is and love myself for who I am in the moment and not compromise into the point of a symptom. Like I can do that. Like the love, laugh, vibration, like there's something to the live, laugh, love thing. It's like, it's legit. Like, it's like that vibration does create a tension release. Like it creates a really nice, like, stress decompression. It's so nice. Like I tell people all the time, I'm like, it started with me, and I know you had the same practice. It started with me being fascinated by everything.
Yeah.
But then that got a little bit boring, like to be honest. And it still gets boring. Like I'm like, oh, like, and I'm not laughing to like make fun of stuff, but laughing to like offload tension is such a powerful strategy. Like people will be like, that doesn't work. I'm like, just try it. I'm like,
just try it.
Yeah, I'm like, next time your child is throwing like an absolute, you're not laughing at the child. Let me be clear. It's like next time your 12-year-old is mouthing off to you and whatever, and he's saying like the dumbest shit you can ever think of in your mind, which is typically my experience. Like I'm like, just try to like reset the vibe with like humor.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or just bring that between you two. Like often I'll be like, okay, bro, like bring it down a notch, and used to I would be like, you better stop saying that to me right now. Like, that vibe of like, and then he would be like, whoa, what's got you so freaking psycho? And then I would be like, level 10 ramped up because I'm like, I'm not a psycho. You know what I mean? And it's
Yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
okay, now I'm just like,
Psycho.
I mean, provided it's nothing terrible, right? Provided he's not being real terrible. But
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I even tell Frank that, like, I'm like, it's just not fun to be in a constant state of like criticism and stress. And it's not fun to be in these states that create these chronics, this dis-ease are all just negative emotions. Like,
Yeah.
it's not fun. It doesn't mean you don't ever face a negative. I had a big cry about school districts this morning because it's a rough situation.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm like, you know what? No, I'm going to get a nice tea from Starbucks and I'm going to have some, the rest of the day is not going to be crashed down. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. Hey, on that note, I'm getting real hungry, like lightheaded hungry.
No, that's fine. So we're going to wrap this up anyway because we had till 1. That's perfect. Okay. So you guys, you all can find Maura. I will put all of that info in the show notes, but on Instagram, she's Flex Health with Maura. If you hear this between now and Monday, she has a few spots left for women for this first round of her divorce course.
Healing divorce
course. Healing from divorce. You should probably say the official name because I'm like butchering that.
It's called Healing Divorce Trauma, so you can share your story without crying.
There you go. So if you're struggling with like just literally that painful memory over and over, contact her. I'm gonna post this on my Instagram too. That way you guys can go back to it. And this is an ongoing thing she's gonna do. So I'm sure that she'll have a nice little wait list going after this.
Yes, yes, yes. So, yep, 10 spots left for 2024, and then I'll open up another batch in 2025, probably in January.
Cool. Okay. Well, thanks for filling us in. I can't believe we're 6 to 8 weeks out from the end of 2024, but
I know.
Like, I'm like, whoa. But that's so exciting. Okay. Thanks, friend. Love you very much. I will talk to you soon.
Love you too. See you later.
Bye. And stream.